Well, hello, friends. This is David Vos. I hope you're all having a great day. And, well, I'm having a really good day. It's a beautiful day here in Oklahoma. Gosh, just look at it. It's so beautiful. This is kind of up on the top of the hill where I'm setting up my place. I'm gonna build me a cabin up here. It's real pretty. Well, today I want to go ahead and get to making the first in the series that I've been promising everybody. I've made a couple of videos in maybe the last month. I really haven't made a lot of videos, but I've been promising that I would get on here and we'd make a series about, well, I was going to call it the Tartars because everybody's been asking me about them. And it's about that. It is about that. That's something that we're going to get into. Who are these Tartars? But I don't think I should call this whole series a series on the Tartars, because really the primary thing that this series is about is the lost tribes of Israel. Now, you know, this has been a favorite subject for a lot of people. A very interesting subject. Very, very interesting. But, you know, in spite of the fact that there has been a lot of information dug up over the last, man, I don't know, hundreds of years, people have come up with information about this. I don't know when the first book was written about the lost tribes of Israel. I mean, you don't hear about that as much if you're going to read church fathers or way back, you know, or when you're studying Luther or Calvin or somebody like that. By the time of the Adventist movement, the Millerites, latter Anabaptists, and different groups that were more modern, Pentecostal groups, they don't talk a lot about it because they got to the point where they more or less took the Bible in such a way, because they didn't understand it, because they'd made so many interpretations of prophecy so many times, it got confusing. It really did. Most of you know that what I believe this is the absolute truth, but all of the prophecies in the Old Testament were fulfilled by the time of the generation of the first century church. And I think the way you can best prove that is that Jesus said this generation would not pass before all things are fulfilled. That's pretty clear words. But we don't just have those words, because maybe we're misunderstanding it, what he meant. But he specifically talked in there, when he said that, about the prophecies of Daniel's beast, the Antichrist, and the destruction of Jerusalem. And, you know, so Jesus specifically explained what the prophecies of the Bible, well, not so much that he got deep into what they are going to mean, like explaining each of all the prophecies, but basically, when Jesus said that all things shall be fulfilled by the prophets in this generation, and he specifically mentioned Jerusalem shall be trampled on by the nations, and he specifically talked about Daniel and the beast and that prophecy, or the times of the Gentiles, then we know that Jesus meant that the prophecy of Daniel was going to be fulfilled in that generation. And that basically a literal Antichrist in a literal temple was going to be fulfilled in that 40-year generation. Jesus talked around the year 30 AD, and Jerusalem was destroyed in around 70. So that's 40 years. That's, interestingly enough, a generation. And there are other verses in the New Testament. You know, the apostles talked about that generation. You know, there's no way for Jesus' words to be true if he says, surely I tell you, this generation will by no means pass. That's impossible to say, well, we're going to take that to mean another generation in, in the year 2000, or, like some have done, like Adventists started off in 1874, and, well, originally 1844, then they went to 1874, and Jehovah's Witnesses extended that to 1914. They kept doing that over and over again, and trying to come up with some idea that we were in the last generation. When they got to 1914, they thought, wow, we got a good one here, because, the war that we went through was called the World War. So they thought, boy, can't get much worse than that. So this must be the war to end all wars. Well, then World War I came and went, and we had some famines and pestilences, and there were a lot of bad things. And then World War II came. Oh, buddy, that had to be the answer. It was Hitler. Imagine living in that generation. And this world war was raging, and millions of people were dying all over the world. Hitler was like, obviously the Antichrist, right? At the time, almost everybody thought he was. And so they thought for sure that biblical prophecy was being fulfilled. Because, Daniel's prophecy about the beast, that's just one prophecy, but basically, what is it about? It's about a literal temple and some events that would occur. But intertwined amongst all of that is much more. Remember, Jesus said, excuse me, the times of the Gentiles. What are these times of the Gentiles? Well, we can get a better understanding of this, till all Israel be come in. That's what the Apostle Paul says. But we can get a better understanding by listening to what Paul's talking about when he says that Israel's like a tree, and it's got a lot of branches, and many branches were broke off, and then there's going to be some branches grafted back in. He talks about when the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, then all Israel will be saved. Well, that's a little bit difficult to say for sure what he means, because your mind gets taken up with things and thoughts like, well, the tree is Israel. So these other branches that are grafted in, they can't be Israel. That must be the Gentiles. So when the Gentiles become in, then Israel's going to be saved. Now, how's Israel going to be saved then because of that? Like, what does that mean? I mean, if these are not real Israel, they're fake branches, right? We're going to graft them in. So now they're going to become part of the fatness of the tree, the Apostle Paul says. They're going to partake. And we add that to some of the things that the Apostle Peter said when he said that, they're in Acts, and he talks about how God has saw fit to bring in the nations into this thing. And the Apostle Paul talked about how they're no longer unclean, but this is a great mystery that God had in mind to include the nations. But here's part of the mystery that nobody has really ever written a book about or figured out. But we can go back. We're going to go through some verses in the Bible, and there's so many of them starting in Genesis, all the way through the Bible. We're going to explain exactly what Israel is, where they went, and what prophecy's all about. Because even though everything was fulfilled in that generation, there's more to come. We got the part about, the result of what happened in the first century. The result of that is going to be that all Israel shall be saved. The Apostle Paul spoke in the first century, and yet he spoke in the future by saying that when the Gentiles be come in. So there's more to it. Because at the time that Paul spoke, probably maybe 60, 70, that's probably just before the destruction of Jerusalem, he was referring to a future time. And so we need to understand then what that future time is. What true Israel is. Is the tree literal that got its branches broken off? Is the grafting literal? What are the times of the Gentiles? And who are the Gentiles? Because you see, what people haven't understood is that, and we've said this over and over again, but Jacob is God's son. Jacob had 12 children. And there are 12 signs or houses in the zodiac. And just like all the mythologies that have the 12 gods that rule Olympus or whatever that might be, there were 12 gods in the Sumerian. Egyptian hieroglyphs talk about the same God. Sometimes they have different names from different nations, but it's all about this cosmology, the ancient esoteric wisdom. It's about this ancient science. It's astrology. And this is why Jesus chose 12 apostles to represent all of the houses of Israel, the fullness. See, and then you've got the book of Revelation talking about the 144,000, which is similar to Exodus and Deuteronomy and the book of Numbers, which numbers these 12 battalions, basically, that went in to conquer the land. They were divided. They divided the land. This is what the whole Bible's about, is the children of Israel going in to divide the land up and conquer the world. Well, we find out it's a spiritual conquering. The Apostle Paul says, our weapons of warfare are not carnal. So we're going to have to figure out that the Old Testament was all fulfilled literally by the first century. But now we're looking at the book of Revelation, and we're seeing that every one of the prophets, whether it's Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, they're all mentioned in the book of Revelation. But the book of Revelation was written in 100 AD. So it has to be fulfilled after 70. So now it's a different fulfillment because it's the same prophecies spoken of in Revelation. Like the one in Daniel that's talked about in Revelation 12. About this Antichrist, about this beast. But yet now it's future. So the book of Revelation encompasses all of the prophets. But now it's different. Now it's spiritual. So now we've got a spiritual Israel. So we've got to understand what it means, spiritual Israel. Well, we know that the temple that was literal, according to the apostles, represents a spiritual temple, which is this body. But see, there's various layers. Your body is a temple. And you've got a most holy within your heart, where the blood of Christ is sprinkled. And the defilement that's upon your heart is removed. And you have faith to enter into his throne through grace. But yet, remember, there's another body, and that's the body of Christ. And that means that the only begotten Son is a universal one Son that we're all part of. So it's not just your body. So in one sense, your body is the entire temple. But in a sense, it's the body of man. For instance, in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 12, where Michael and the archangel battles with the devil and his angels. And there's another reference to that in the book of Jude, where it speaks of Satan having a dispute with the archangel Michael over Moses' body. So that gives us the indication that Moses' body is something that refers to something similar to what Christ's body refers to. Christ is that spiritual inner man, that divine only begotten Son, the Logos, the perfect representation of our Father in heaven and his will. But the other body, the carnal flesh that's under the law that Moses represents, that's a different body. We have both. We all came into the world and we partook of flesh and blood, just as Christ partook of flesh and blood. And he did that as did his brothers. So we're looking at the Bible this way. I'm covering this real quickly because I want you to get the gist of how the Bible is to be understood. It used to be a physical description of supposedly physical history, and there were prophecies that were supposed to have happened literally. But by the time of Jesus, we see another fulfillment that has yet to be fulfilled, and it's a spiritual one. And we see what it means to understand things spiritually. What we have is a lot of people taking things partly spiritual and then partly physical. So they're saying, oh, well, Israel's going to go back to their land and make a new temple. Well, everything was fulfilled literally in the first generation, in the first century. Christ said that generation wouldn't pass away and all things would take place. So what we have to understand then is that it's going to be fulfilled spiritually now. And that means that everything that's in the Old Testament, say, for instance, a war, is now a spiritual battle. And so, therefore, these 5 kings that Joshua impaled and crucified, took them out of a cave and rolled the stone away from the cave and hung them up on a cross and crucified them. That represents the 5 senses. And if you want to conquer that spiritual land of promise, you've got to conquer your 5 senses. Jericho and the walls represents the walls and the defensive system of this physical, carnal nature. And that harlot that's in Jericho that we save is our soul. That's why, for some reason, in the Old Testament, they choose to save this one harlot. Right? Why would you save a harlot? But every other man, woman, and child has to perish, and the city and the donkeys and everything. You can't take the gold or the silver, nothing. But we're gonna save this one harlot, because you see, everything in this physical world, the carnal world, is useless. The flesh is worth nothing at all, Jesus said. What we want to get out of this world is we're trying to get out of here with our bare soul so that we can be saved, because it's a spiritual world that we're going to inherit. And we're going into a spiritual kingdom that's within us. So that's what the spiritual meaning is. So, understanding the Bible that way, then we can go back through the scriptures and understand then what Israel really is. It's very odd, because some things start off physical, end up spiritual. But there's a little bit of a difficulty that we have sometimes going from the physical to the spiritual. Because if Israel went into the world and they were scattered physically, and the fulfillment that they shall be regathered is going to be fulfilled, shouldn't they be regathered physically? You can say, well, okay, they were, Cyrus the Great, he was the Messiah. It says that in the book of Isaiah, chapter 44. Chapter 45, verse 1, I think. It says that Cyrus is the Messiah. And we're going to find out that this physical prophecy was fulfilled literally with Cyrus the Great. But yet, it's still to be fulfilled spiritually. You say, oh, well, that was literal. Jesus was a person. He's a literal Christ. Okay. But you see, the absolute real fulfillment is the Christ in you. That's the fulfillment. The spiritual kingdom that's within you, that we're waiting for, the parousia of Christ. So, who then is Israel? Because we've got a lot of people saying, oh, I mean, there's books and books written on all of this details about where Israel went and how they went to England. They're the British, the Irish, and the Scottish. So therefore, they must be white Americans, right? And Australians and Canadians, things like that. Think about it. I mean, oh, they're going to fulfill the prophecies, and the prophecy says they're going to be a company of nations. Now, see, there's where we start to twist things just a little bit, because you see, it doesn't say company of nations. It says a multitude of nations. Well, maybe it doesn't even say that. But it does say a many nations. And in this video, I'm going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. And maybe we've said that in the past, and you might have felt like, well, I got gypped. I didn't get proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. But I am going to prove, I believe, in this video, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Israel is every nation on the face of the earth today. And that's the fulfillment. The spiritual Israel is all of us. Mankind, all of us, as the spiritual Christ. Part of the body of Christ. All that are in Christ, which means all of us. Not just some church like the Catholic Church or only the Adventists fulfill this or something. No. Only those people who keep the Sabbath. No. Because you see, all of that's symbolic too. And we're all going to keep the Sabbath, but spiritually. So it's nothing to do with ceremonies and rituals and physical circumcision, because the Apostle Paul says circumcision means nothing at all, but it's the circumcision to the heart. See, there's where the spiritual comes in. So it doesn't matter that there are some Jews somewhere in the world that can trace their line back to Israel. Perhaps they're circumcised. Perhaps they keep all of the laws of Torah. Well, they're not Israel. I'm sorry. That's not what the Bible's talking about. Maybe that's what some religions teach today. You've got all these little verses in your head and you've been convinced. I mean, the only nation or race, right? In your mind, it's a race. So you're thinking, well, it's got to be the white race because the white race seems to be ruling the world and they control the gates to their enemies. That's one of the prophecies. They shall control the gates to their enemies. See, now what do you do with that if you're a person who believes that the black race is the Israelites? How has it been fulfilled, that part? That the black race, though they are in all the... You could easily say that the black race went to America and somehow mixed with the people over here and turned out Native American somehow. Or maybe the Mongolians, were spread to Japan and all around the world. Maybe I hear a lot of people saying that the Egyptians were black and they went to India and the original Hindu gods was black. There's black Buddhas and statues of black Buddhas, pictures of black Buddhas, and all of the Shiva and many of the gods over there in the East were all black. The Madonna was black and the child. And so this makes the black race, those of you who are studying this and you're wanting to know who you are, and I don't blame you. And of course we're going to look at the scriptures, and if somebody shows us that there's a proof that somehow we're the chosen, then we're going to look into that, and maybe we're going to be proud of that. But I want us to understand that there's something even better than this. Best thing is that our family is extended. We're all family. This is even better, okay? Wait till you hear the truth. Oh my goodness. The kingdom of God is within us, and we are all the children of our Father in heaven, and we're going to all be saved in His grace and love one another. There's not going to be any more fighting. There's not going to be any more war. They shall beat their weapons of war into plowshares, and will be gardeners instead of warriors. Isn't that going to be great? We're going to love one another, everybody. And I'm going to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. We're going to go through all the verses in Scripture. I don't know why people haven't seen it. It's just very odd to me that Scripture, it's like the hardest thing in the world for anybody to figure out what the Scripture means. We go for hundreds and hundreds of years of people coming up with one idea and another, and they just never learn. Like, oh, maybe the end of the world's coming in 1844. No, it didn't happen. So how about 1864? Well, that didn't work. How about 18? And it just never stops. So in astrology, you have the 12 houses, you have the 72 deacons. This is a huge system that encompasses all of the numbers. It's numerology. It encompasses all of the sciences. Yeah, 360 degrees. There's 60 minutes. There's 60 seconds in each minute. So it's a system of 60s, yeah, but it's also a system of 12s. 7's in there too, because there's 7 days in a week. Right? That's part of the calendar, 360 days in a year. 7 days in a week, and at the end of each week you rest, so that has to do with time. And there's 52 weeks in a year. 5 and 2 is 7. So all the numbers are incorporated. Then you go 40 years around and around, 360 degrees. 40 times 360 is 144,000, and there's the complete number of Israel. But that's not it, because Jacob had 12 sons. And yet it says that out of his loins, out of Jacob's loins, 70 went down into Egypt. You see, 70 is the number of the nations. All the nations. So it's not just Israel, as you've understood it, that comes from Jacob. But it's all Israel shall be saved. It's also the 70. It's also the nations. How do you prove that? Revelation chapter 12, chapter 7, specifically, where it says, I saw 144,000. And then he says, and look and behold, I saw a great multitude which no man could number. Now think about this. You cannot number it. No man can do that. And yet there are people running around saying, oh, well, there's 1 billion Christians. Well, now, wait a minute. If there's a way to number Christians, then that can't be it. Because this is going to be a prophecy that was given to Abraham, who was, according to the Apostle Paul, the father of faith. That means the father of all faiths. Yeah, he says, God told Abraham, you will be the father of a multitude. Now, think about it. Not just a multitude of people, but a multitude of nations. Not just 12. How many nations are there? Well, today we've got like over 200 nations. But throughout the Bible, it says that the nations were 70. And they are important to our Father in heaven too. They are encompassed inside the 12 because the deacons are in each of the houses. So the whole thing is what we're looking at. The fullness of the Gentiles. When they become in, all Israel shall be saved because each of the Gentiles are within one of the houses of the 12. So, very important that we understand. Very, very important that we understand that we're not looking for Jews. Most of you probably know that, that's just one tribe, Judah. They had a prophecy given to them that the scepter wouldn't depart from Judah until he who has the legal right comes. See, but remember, when the one who has the legal right comes to rule, then Judah will not rule anymore. So it is a temporary thing. Now, why is it temporary? Well, Jesus came, and what did he do? He said, hey, you Jews. He says, I'm taking the keys away from you. And I'm going to give it to those who are producing its fruit. He gave prophecies and parables about a vineyard, a tree that he was planting, and he wanted it to grow. And there were certain individuals in the vineyard that were taking care of it, caretakers, stewards. But they weren't taking very good care of it. So he says, I'm not going to let you do that anymore. You're not taking good care of it. This goes all the way back to, these prophecies go back to Genesis. Genesis chapter 28. And, you've all heard about the prophecy where God comes to Abraham and he says, I'm going to multiply your seed like the stars of heaven, like the dusts of the earth. See the reason why it says dusts, particles of the earth, and stars? Because the dust is on the ground and it's earthly. And the stars are in the sky and they're spiritual. Because you see, Abraham's not just going to be the father of all the physical bodies on the earth, but also the spiritual body. Because through Abraham will come Christ, that spiritual logos, the body of Christ. But I want you to look at, now, remember, Genesis 28, I think 14, right around in there, maybe 15. If you read in there, it talks about how he says, your seed, Abraham, is going to spread around the world. It's going to spread west and east and north and south. Now, what do you think he meant by that? Now, I suppose you wouldn't know just by reading that one verse. You might think, well, maybe he meant north of Jerusalem, right? Just 100 miles. So he's talking about, I'm going to give you Palestine. Well, it's this peculiar thing to say to somebody if you're just going to give them this little country about the size of Massachusetts, right? That would be silly if you took some person and set them down in Massachusetts and that was going to be their holy land, just that little spot there. And you said, now look around north and east. In fact, you could probably see, if you got up on a mountain, you could probably see further than that, than the state of Massachusetts. So he says, there's been one place where he says, everything you can see. One place he says, from the river Nile into the river Euphrates. Well, that's a large area. That covers all of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, Iraq. I mean, my goodness, right there. The promised land would be far greater than just the little land of Palestine. So there's so much that we don't see when we read I mean, it's like we read it, but we're just, I think I think this thing where people are talking spiritually, literally, oh, they're taking things one time literally, one time spiritually. I think it confuses people. So that they don't even understand what the Bible's saying anymore. Because if you really understand what literally and spiritually means, you don't have that problem. The spiritual is when you completely disregard all the literal and you understand it in a spiritual sense, as a parable. It's a totally easy thing to understand, but most people have been lied to. There's a place in 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 10 that says that he is going to take his people Israel and plant them, and they will reside and never again be forced to move. And their enemies will no longer afflict them. And you'll have rest. Well, that's kind of strange because in 2 Samuel, he's talking to David, King David. I mean, Israel had peace for 40 years under King David. They already were there in their land. They had peace. And here's a prophecy that they're going to return to their land. Well, they were already there. This is long before they even left their land. So this is an ongoing theme, even before it even happened. This was something that evidently our Father in heaven had planned even before he did it, years before he did it. When he was talking to David, he says, look, I'm going to give you individuals a place, and I'm going to plant you. Well, they were in Palestine during David's time. So he's talking about a long-term plan of planting these individuals, the 12, right, all of them, the 70 sons of Jacob. He's going to plant them in the earth. Hosea talks about planting them like seed, too. Isaiah 26:15. I'm going to read a couple of these scriptures. It says, you have added to the nation. You have added to the nation. You've glorified yourself. You extended afar all the borders of the land. Woo! What does that mean? How far is he going to extend the borders of the land? I'm telling you that the spiritual fulfillment was given to us in Revelation chapter 7, where it says all nations, tribes, and tongues. Who are these, my Lord? Well, that's the fulfillment of Genesis 28:14. The multitude of peoples, no, the multitude of nations. Not just 12, not just physical Israel, not just the land of Palestine. We're going to extend the borders now. Let's see, 27:6. It says, in the coming days, Jacob will take root. Israel will put forth blossoms and actually sprout. This is Isaiah. This is, what, 600 BC, 700 BC? 700 BC, long after David. David was back in, 1100 BC, 1000 BC. So, this is after Israel, the nation, the 10 tribes were scattered into all the earth. And Isaiah is a prophet to Israel. That's what Isaiah is. He's a prophet to the 10 tribes, not so much to the Jews. Other prophets were kind of specifically prophesying to the tribe of Judah. But this Isaiah is very, very beautiful because it has a lot of prophecies about Christ, the coming of Christ, and the gathering of all of Israel. But in that time, 700 BC, after Israel was already taken captive, Assyria came in and took the 10 tribes and took them up into Assyria. And at that point, Isaiah says, in the coming days, Jacob will take root. See this root thing? I mean, like, nobody plants a tree accidentally. That's not what this is talking about. This is a garden. Remember, Jesus talks about this garden. And he wanted a steward to take care of the garden. So, Israel will put forth blossoms. They will sprout the surface of the earth, the whole world. Whoa. Isn't it strange that I don't think any religion's ever noticed that word there? The whole earth? And they've never, if they saw it, they never applied it in any way. Israel's going to blossom. They're going to, Hosea says, like seed, they're going to be placed and planted into all the earth. and in the place where it was said, "You're not my people," because it says they're going to forget who they are. They don't even know who they are. Just, you're going to be abandoned. But in that place where you don't know who you are, there's going to be my children. Wow. You're going to fill the whole earth with produce. I think it's just completely amazing that people have not understood the scripture before this. Because you see, we're going to go through these verses and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt what Israel is and what it means when all the Gentiles become in. Then all Israel will be saved. We're going to prove what that means. And this is going to be a series. This is going to be so interesting because, first of all, we're going to prove what we're talking about. So we can get that out of the way. And then we're going to literally go into the history of where these people went. We talked about Shintoism. We're going to talk about Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. Do you know that we can prove that Zoroastrianism is the religion of our Father in heaven? Right from the scriptures. Because that's the religion of Israel. They had lots of religions, and they're all the same religion. And they all prophesy about Christ. In fact, the book of Isaiah that we're in right now, we're reading here in chapter 26, just a second ago, talks about who is going to do this planting and shepherd these sheep. It says, Cyrus, he's my Messiah. Who's Cyrus? Osiris. Haha, yeah. Cyrus the Great. He was a Persian, right? Yeah. What is a Persian doing as the Lord's Messiah? And what kind of work does he do that is so great that he's the Messiah? Well, because you see, the work of planting the world and spreading abroad the seed and growing this plantation, the garden, that Jesus talked about all the time, this most important thing, came to the Jews and they weren't taking care of it. Excuse me, they weren't good stewards. So he said, I'm going to take the keys away from you and give it to somebody producing its fruit. Because we need some fruit here. We want to fill the earth with a beautiful seed and the kingdom of our Father and peace in all nations. We're going to have righteousness. That's the theme of the Bible. That's the theme. And so, Cyrus then, remember, the children of Israel went to a little area. It actually mentions the names of the towns where they were taken. And you can go into history and find that those individuals became the Saki in history. Later on, we read it in Greek, and it's called the Scythians. But they're also called the Sake. And we find Herodotus and individual historians from the past that they say they came from slaves and that they originated right around 700, right when the Israelites were taken captive in this very same little town up there in Assyria, which is northwestern India, right where Buddhism got started. Now we can prove that Buddha was a Saki. Yeah, they were originally called Saki, or the sons of Isaac. And the Scythians, they were there in northern India, where they were taken captive. And it says they overthrew the Persians, and they went all over the world. They went to China, they went to Japan. Shintoism, 70 million Shinto converts in the world. And they have a temple on Mount Moriah in Japan. Just like the Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, where they say the temple is located, they have another Mount Moriah in Japan. And they've got a temple that's just like the one in Jerusalem. They've got an Ark of the Covenant that they carry around on 4 poles. They've got a priesthood. Has a little, same garb, the same priesthood robes, same holy days. Did you know that Japanese letters have Hebrew letters, that they're identical? This is coming to light only in the last few years. We never understood this before. But Buddhism, if you go back to the original shrine where Buddha was born, in this area where he was born in a town that these Israelites, these ancient Israelites, were taken into captivity. And if you start reading that the ancient Buddhist writings, you'll see that it's talking about that they were of this particular tribe of the Saki. And Gautama Buddha, Gautama, is from the tribe of Gad. See? So, we're going to go into all that in another video. We're going to have a series on this. But first of all, we need to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt. We said we're going to do this beyond a shadow of a doubt. We're going to prove that all nations are Israel. Once we prove that, then, of course, Shintoism and Zoroastrianism, of course, you know, we could do this several ways. I mean, the book of Daniel, beyond a shadow of a doubt, says that Daniel was made ruler over Babylon and Persia, and that his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were made governors of satraps. Of course, history tells you who ruled the satraps, and that was the nation of Israel. It says it in the Bible. It says that they were the Scythians. It says that in the history books. And they ruled over northern India, and they are the ones who were these local tribes that were the rulers, right? Daniel was of the tribe of Judah. Remember the prophecy that Judah had 2 kids from Tamar. And the first kid that was the firstborn was Zerah. But then there was Pharez. And so there was this struggle in the womb, and there was these 2 lines of kings. Well, remember David, King David was of the line of Pharez. But why is that? Because Zerah is supposed to be the firstborn. Well, because Zerah, it says, all of his firstborn children, they all left. They went out and started the country of Troy. Yeah. There was Brutus, that he gets these, Diana, this goddess, comes down and gives him, well, he didn't know where to go, right? He ended up conquering the Roman armies and just this little handful of people, Brutus and his little armies, and they had captured the king, and they said, here's what we want you to do. We'll let you go, but we want you to outfit us with horses and armor and everything, and we'll go on our way. And that was the deal they made. So they took off towards Gaul. They went west, Brutus and his armies. We find out in the story that Brutus is of the line of Zerah. He came out from Israel, from Egypt. And so they got wandering around up in France. You know, Gaul is France, ancient France. And they didn't know where to go. And so the goddess Diana came down and said, go to this little island. And when you get there, you're going to be prosperous, and you're going to provide the entire world, with the kings in every nation. Well, see, that's that same prophecy. It's in the Bible. Judah is going to have the scepter until he who comes who has the legal right. And it's going to go through Zerah. And this is the czars, right? You got the Caesars and the Nebuchadnezzars and the czars of Russia and the Khazars. We got all these czars that came from the line of Zerah. They went into all the world. And the story there about Brutus tells you the whole thing in a nutshell. We're going to go through all these stories, and this series could last, I don't know. We did, I think, like 10 in the last series, so maybe we'll do another 10. But there's so much to find out. Zoroastrianism is another beautiful one. The Magi, right? The 3 Magi that came and worshipped Jesus when he was born. Who were they? Well, Daniel was head of the Magi. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were governors of satraps of Persia, Media. That's that area up there where Zoroastrianism, Zarathustra. There's that Zerah again. That's where it started. And one of the clan there, Buddha, he was a prince, and he gave up all his wealth because he saw his people, they were suffering. Israel was slaves, and they came out from the house of slaves. And he wanted to teach them truth. So he sought his Father in heaven, and he found the religion of peace, and he taught them. But let's prove this. 1 Chronicles 17:9. It's going to blow your mind when you find out what the scriptures tell you about this. How clear it really is. And I shall certainly appoint a place for my people, Israel, and plant them. They will reside where they are, and no more will they be disturbed. And the sons of unrighteousness will not wear them out again, just as they did at the first. Isaiah 41:1. Attend to me in silence, you islands, and let the nations themselves get power. Let them approach, because at that time they will speak. Let us come up to judgment itself. Who has roused up someone from the sunrise? Who proceeded in righteousness to call him to his feet, to give nations before him, and to subdue all the kings? Who kept giving them like dust to his sword? He's going to tell you that this is King Cyrus, his Messiah. Well, who do you suppose was behind this power that Daniel ends up becoming the head of? A Zarathustrian priest, Daniel becomes, one of the Magi. And his other lineal royal descendants, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they end up becoming rulers. And one of these rulers becomes Buddha. And this is saying here in Isaiah 41, who did this? This happened because our Father in heaven made it happen. It wasn't an accident. And this is why he's called the Messiah, because this was his plan, to plant many people throughout the entire world, all the way to America. Because if you look at the Native Americans, you see that they look just like people over there in where? Just like it says here, the islands. It says, attend to me in silence, you islands. What islands? Well, we're going to find out what islands he's talking about, because the islands is where his people will be. And it's all because his Messiah, Cyrus, had a job to do. And it says kings fell. And he went pursuing them. He kept pursuing them and kept peacefully passing along on his feet over the path by which he did not proceed. Who has been active and has done this? Verse 5, the islands saw and they began to be afraid. The very extremities of the earth, the ends of the earth, they began to tremble. Verse 8, you, Israel, are my servant, Jacob. I have chosen you, the seed of Abraham. Right? The multitude of nations. This is a plan here to plant them like seed. Isaiah 49, 1 through 3, we just read that. And verse 12, it says, these will come even from far away. And look, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim. Now, if you look up to try and figure out where Sinim is, a lot of people would say, well, they don't know. But most scholars say that Sinim means China, southern China. It comes from the word Sinai. So all the areas that start off with Sinai usually refer to China. But we know wherever the Sinim is, it's being used here by the prophet Isaiah to represent someplace far away. And he's already talking about islands. And he says the word islands many times. Other people say, well, the islands doesn't really mean islands. It means the coastlands. Well, either way, islands or coastlands. Even doesn't really matter which way you look at that. They have to do with where our Father in heaven put Israel. Where is that? Japan? Is that a coastland or an island? Korea? The Philippines? Yeah, that's over there by China, isn't it? See, the west in Europe, the north over in Afghanistan, and it's north of Israel, right? That's where the Scythians went. And then over there in Sinim as well. Jeremiah 3:18. In those days, the house of Judah will walk to the house of Israel. And then they together will come out of the land of the north into the land that I have given as a possession to your forefathers. Well, first of all, we've seen that the land that he gave Abraham as a possession wasn't necessarily Palestine. In fact, specifically, no. Because he said north, south, west, east, all that your eyes can see, every place that your foot trespasses on. Remember, the children of Israel, their foot trespassed on the whole world. It says every four corners of the earth, even the land of Sinim. So it can't just be the place of Palestine. But notice that Judah is something different here than Israel, because there were two different kingdoms. There's the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, and they were taken captive two different times. So the people we call Judah today, that's not the same thing. They're the ones who have the scepter, and they continued to know who they were. There are still individuals who believe in the religion of Judea today. But the other ones are prophesied to not know who they are anymore. The book of Hosea talks about them. Hosea and Isaiah, both. And talks about how they won't know who they are anymore. They'll be scattered and abandoned in all the world, and then in the latter days they'll come back. Well, here it says, Judah is going to walk to them, or go to them, and together they will come out of the land of the north. Well, that's interesting, because it seems to be, the scepter seems to be ruling up there in England, Ireland, Scotland. And they can literally trace their lineage to Judah. We talked about the stone of Scone, which is the stone of destiny. There's a chair that all the kings and queens of Ireland, Scotland, and England, it was transferred from Ireland to Scotland to England for centuries, until it's been there in Britain for quite a while now. And the kings and queens are enthroned and inaugurated on that chair over that stone. And so they can trace their lineage. I know, it sounds crazy. Most of you have never heard this before, but Prince Charles traces his lineage back, so they know who they are. And they went up in there. They walked north. That's north of Palestine. That's north of where Abraham started out. And they got up there, and they're going to walk back together with Israel, who doesn't know who they are. So we're going to find out who Israel is. Jeremiah 31:7. For this is what the Lord has said, cry out loudly to Jacob with rejoicing, and cry shrilly at the head of the nations. Publish it. Give praise and say, O Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Here I am bringing them from the land of the north, and I will collect them together from the remote parts of the earth. There will be the blind and the lame and the pregnant woman, all together, a great congregation, a multitude will return here. Yeah, a multitude. What does that mean, a multitude? Let me show you something. Look at Genesis 24:60. It's going to blow your mind. Genesis 24:60. I don't suppose anyone's ever showed you this. Why would they? It'd make too much sense. Genesis 24:60. This is going to prove it. You talk about, we said we were going to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Here we go. Genesis 24:60. And they began to bless Rebekah and say to her, you, our sister, may you become thousands of millions. Thousands of millions. You know what 1,000 million is? That's a billion. So, plural, thousands of millions would mean billions. Friends, there's only 7 billion people in the world. So we have billions of people in the world. And according to this, all of them, Genesis 24:60, all of them are going to come through Rebekah. And they're going to be called children of Isaac, right? The Sakis. Just unbelievable that the Bible has something like that. And we haven't ever been told that this plan for a multitude of nations, that doesn't mean 12, that means a multitude of nations, all of the nations, 72, which goes into the whole. And now we find out that there's going to be billions. See, that's impossible then for it to just be the black race. There's probably 1 billion black people in the world. There's probably 1 billion white people in the world. But you see, the seed of Israel is billions. And they're in every 4 corners of the earth. A multitude of nations. All peoples. Hosea 1:10. And the number of the sons of Israel must become like the grains of the sand of the sea that cannot be measured or numbered. See, there again. How many Israelites are in the world? 10 million? I don't know. We can number them, though. They've got a census over there in Israel. They number them. But you see, that's not the plan. The plan is that Israel will become like the grains of the sand of the sea that cannot be measured. See, that is a direct fulfillment of this prophecy in Revelation, where it says all nations, a multitude which no man can number, in Revelation chapter 7. The word no man can number comes right straight out of Hosea. And Revelation, the Apostle John says, that means every nation. That's what it means. When the Bible says that you cannot number it, it means every nation, every tribe. There are a lot of tribes in Africa, friends, but they're not all tribes in Africa. There are a lot of tribes, you know, there's the Lombards, the Germanic tribes, the Visigoths and the Herlus and the Vandals, different tribes up there. But that's not all the tribes. The Aryan, let's understand that the Aryan race is not just white people. It never was. That's a misunderstanding. The Aryan peoples is all the people of the world. It's the modern Homo sapien. And it was a plan by our Father in heaven. This whole thing's a plan. It didn't happen accidentally. We're all here for a reason, and we're going to come together. And isn't it funny how the Constitution of the United States was put in here through a divine plan of our Father? And it specifically said that this liberty and this justice is for all people, the rights of all people. So it says, it must occur in the place in which it was used to be said of them, you are not my people. That is where it will be said, you are the sons of the living God. Who's the living God? That's the same thing that the Apostle Peter said when Jesus said, who am I? He said, you're the son of the living God. Right? See, this is the sons of the living God. That's that spiritual child, the spiritual Israel. It's going to be every nation. And verse 11, and the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will certainly be collected together into a unity. Wow. Genesis 13:16. Look at that. And I will constitute your seed like the dust of the earth. If a man could be able to count the dust particles of the earth, then your seed could be numbered. Now, get up, go about into the land through its length and through its breadth, because to you I'm going to give it. So Abraham continued to live in the tents. Later he came and dwelt among the big trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And that's where he began to build an altar. We talked about how Hebron originally was Kiriath Arba. Arba, see, the H is silent. Hebra, Arba, it's the same place. And so it was originally called Kiriath Arba, but then it takes on the word Hebron, and that's where we get the word Hebrews, and that's where Abraham set up his tent. And it says he made an altar there, and we've discovered in other videos, we've talked about how that is the Great Pyramid. That's where he was buried. Sarah was buried there, Isaac and Jacob, and all the prophets. See, not in the Great Pyramid, not in that king's chamber and the queen's chamber, anything like that, but down in a pit. It talks about it. It's a cave below the ground. Abraham bought the cave. And that's also where Adam was buried. Yeah, so many things we haven't been told. Isn't it just crazy? 15:5. It says, now he brought him outside and he said, look up, please, to the heavens and count the stars if you can. If you could possibly count them. And he went on to say to him, to your seed will become like the stars of heaven. Boy, it doesn't sound like just a few Judeans, does it? Or, you know, the fullness of Israel, what is it, 144,000? You can number that, right? There was a number put on that. But the other group, there is no number. The 70 nations, they also came out of the loins of Jacob, and they are part of the oneness. Each of the 70 fits inside one of the 12 houses. 22:17. Genesis 22:17. And I shall bless you, and I will multiply your seed like the stars of heaven and like the grains of the sand that are on the seashore. And your seed will take possession of the gates of their enemies. You see, the only nation that's ever taken the gates of all of their enemies is the United States. And I think everybody knows that the United States is a nation of all nations. There isn't just one race in the United States. But all the nations came here. And we have that Statue of Liberty that stands there and says, bring all your tired and you're hungry. There's going to be billions. It has to be more than just one nation or a group of nations or a company of nations. It's all the nations. That's what that means. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it there because I think we've proved it. I think that we have proven now what the Bible's saying when it says Israel and spiritual Israel and who they are and where they are. In the coming videos on this series, we're going to get into specifically where they went, who they are. Why is it important if everybody's Israel? Well, it's important because, you see, our Father in heaven left a trail so that we could follow it. Because, you see, the revelation of God is deep. And it isn't just this one religion here in Rome that made these edicts and ecumenical councils and paper bulls and decided to murder and have inquisitions and destroy people and burn all the libraries and hide it all from us. No, that's not where we're going to get our information about our Father in heaven. But we need to go to Buddha. We need to go to Zarathustra. We need to go to these religions that our Father in heaven has inspired, and all of them testify of Christ. So anyway, we'll see you guys in the next video in this series. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.